annual AME Church, where this press conference is about to begin. And it's all about curbing gun violence in South Carolina. Mayor Riley, other local leaders are there, including the mayor-elect of the city of Charleston, John Tecklenburg. The conversation here is about curbing gun violence and putting an end to it, starting here in South Carolina. You see Reverend Dr. Norvell Goff. He's about to kick things off. Let's head out there live.
As we come to realize that several months ago, the unthinkable happened in this sacred space. The only way evil can triumph is good folk sit down and do nothing. So we come together this morning to reinforce our common goal to reduce gun violence, not only here in South Carolina, but throughout America. And we come saying that we stand together as one. We move from crisis to action. Because when unspeakable keeps happening, the people must speak. And when the unthinkable keeps happening, the people must think. And when the unnameable keeps happening, the people must name it and recognize it for what it is: evil. Guns kill. But for us to overcome gun violence in America, we must come together with a common goal and a common agenda. So once again, let us stand together, because we are a team facing an evil force.
I'm Joe Riley, the mayor of the city of Charleston. This is a crisis in our community, and it's a crisis in our nation. Nearly 6 months ago, our community was brutally blindsided by the unthinkable, unspeakable. Here in this room, worshiping, studying the Bible, 9 beautiful people lost their lives. Our city and our country was deeply wounded. But let us not let this loss be our city's legacy. Rather, what we do in response to what happened that horrible day. Instead, let us make Charleston once again an example. Let it be clear, we do not want to infringe on law-abiding citizens' rights to own a gun, but we must prevent guns from falling into the wrong hands. Let us reach out to cities in South Carolina that offer their condolences and ask for support. Let us reach out to the people who mourned with us and ask for their effort. Let us reach across this great state in the name of our 9 precious, beautiful, generous, prayerful, worshiping people. Reach out on behalf of those 9 and the 9 killed by guns in our state every 5 days. And let us make South Carolina a safer place to live and to learn and to worship. Let us seek to have done what every citizen in South Carolina deserves and expects. And that is this, that if someone has a gun, they have passed a background check. Count me in as I pass the baton of this city to my good friend and splendid man, Mayor-elect John Tecklenburg. I'll do all I can to support these efforts, to raise awareness about legislation and gun safety, to support the expanded background check legislation, and close the Charleston loophole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Robert Ball, Public Health Infectious Disease Epidemiologist and Adjunct Professor. The gun violence, public health epidemic and crisis continues. It's an epidemic because it has a defined cause, guns, as opposed to invisible particles, germs. It has multiple triggers. It's very complex with multiple confounding factors in which no two cases are identical, but yet it is still an epidemic. As such, we can control and prevent the many causes, perhaps not all, but the many causes of gun violence, and many of the action steps that Gun Sense South Carolina, of which I'm an early member, are in a positive direction, and we ask for your support. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Greg Mullen. I'm the Chief of Police in the City of Charleston, and I view this gun violence situation as a public safety crisis. 6 months ago, I spent a number of hours with many people in this room, outside of this church, around this church, and for several hours after that, and for many days after that, saw the destruction and the horror and the hurt and the pain that was caused by one person. Now, what we also need to do is take that, and we need to grow from that, and we need to make sure that that legacy from the great people that were murdered in this church and the families that survive and go forward is that we stop looking at this situation in means that separate us. We need to look at this, as you've heard, from a common purpose. We all can get behind reducing violence in our communities and making them safer. And I believe strongly that we can achieve that goal because we have people, reasonable people, that want to support that. And I stand here today thinking that by implementing 4 specific issues, which you've heard some about this morning already, we can address this and make a difference. First of all, the expanded background checks. This is simply to address what's already in law that says certain people cannot legally possess handguns. 40% of the handguns and firearms that are purchased in our country go without any background check. We need to change that. We also need to aggressively pursue and prosecute those individuals who violate the gun laws that are already in existence. That is critical. I also think that we need to pass legislation that strengthens our penalties for those individuals who violate gun laws. Currently, if you possess a handgun illegally, the penalty is the same whether you possess that handgun illegally 1 time or 25 times. That needs to change. And fourth, as you just heard, we need to implement and introduce the public health model to this discussion. We need to analyze, collect, and identify root causes to this crisis and develop system-wide approaches through medical, educational, social, and criminal justice systems to address the root causes for gun violence. Together, we can reduce violence in our community. And together, we need to start that today. We need to look at not only the rights of all citizens to live in a community that is safe, and we also need to look at the individual rights of those who wish to legally possess firearms. If we can bring those 2 segments together for a common purpose of reducing violence in our communities, then we will have been successful, and we will leave a legacy for our community and our children that they can be proud of. I'm committed to working with you and all other citizens to make this happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Mayor-elect John Tecklenburg. Thank you, Mayor Riley. This is a community crisis, and there's much to do. Too many citizens of our city and state are innocent victims of preventable gun violence. We in Charleston know that senseless gun violence is not something that happens to other people in other places. It happened right here. I'm here today because South Carolina needs to have a mainstream conversation and action among public officials, law enforcement, prosecutors, victims, and families of victims, and all people of goodwill on how to enhance gun safety, encourage responsible gun ownership, and keep guns out of the hands of folks who we know should not have them. This must not be a conversation about partisan politics and posturing. It does need to be about finding the common ground that can lead to sensible policies and practices that will make South Carolina safer and more secure for our citizens where they live, work, worship, and raise a family. I am a big fan of former President Kennedy and much of my view of public service shaped by him. Once he was asked if his administration was not being naive about its ambitiousness of its vision and political agenda, and admittedly resolving gun violence is an ambitious goal because it's been an enduring problem. But President Kennedy replied by saying, "Our problems are man-made, and therefore they can be solved by man. And man can be as big as he wants. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do that again with God's grace." Thank you very much.
John Tecklenburg wrapping up the first portion of this press conference announcing this grassroots group to combat gun violence in the state of South Carolina. We heard him and also the Chief of Police, Greg Mullen, making the point to drive home 4 points: expanding background checks, reinforcing what's already law, aggressively pursuing and prosecuting those who violate current laws, the need to strengthen penalties for gun violations, and the need to bring in the medical side. And that's what this grassroots group is doing right now. You see the Reverend Joe Darby there as well. We're going to have much more on this coming up on News 2 at 5 and 6 o'clock tonight on this breaking news story. A press conference being held right now inside the very room where 9 people were gunned down back in June.